Hi, so I'm Rachael Crocker, Executive Director for Brewer Morris, where I lead our treasury business and have done so for 6 years. I'm also a DEI lead for the SR Group, which is made up of Brewer Morris, Taylor Root, Carter Murray and Fraser Jones, with offices globally. The SR Group takes very seriously and embraces the role that recruitment must play in ensuring that we're able to create a more equitable workplace. Each year, we celebrate International Women's Day with a series of initiatives, such as events like this and our annual publication, which will be released shortly. We also posted a video this morning of our partners making their commitment around what they will do to continue to help break the bias. I'm delighted to welcome you to our International Women's Day Global Webinar 2022. And this year we are truly international, with panelists joining us from Hong Kong, the US and the UK. And I can see that many of you are joining us from around the world. It's really nice to have everybody coming together on such an important topic, and a special thank you to those of you joining us in areas where perhaps the time is not quite as convenient. There's a couple of admin points before we start. During the discussion, please do feel free to ask questions or to contribute. You can do that by using the Q&A function. We will do our best to include as many of your questions as possible, but if we don't have time, we promise to come back to you afterwards with answers. I also need to just make you aware that the webinar is being recorded and will be available afterwards. So please keep an eye on our social media channels for that. So today is International Women's Day and our theme is Breaking the Bias. I'm so excited to be joined by 3 inspirational women to discuss this important topic. And I'd like to start by welcoming Gail Thakarar, who's Managing Director of GRT International, a global HR and people consultancy in New York. Fiona Callanan-Thorsby, who's Associate General Counsel for McKinsey in Hong Kong. And we have a last minute change to the lineup. I'm really grateful and delighted to welcome Ruth Daniels, who is Group General Counsel and Company Secretary for Superdry in the UK. Hi, ladies, and thank you so much for joining me today. Would you like to start by introducing yourselves? We'll start with you, Gail.
All right, thank you. I'm Gail Thakarar, and as Rachel mentioned, I'm founder and managing director of GRT International. It's an HR, people management, and cultural transformation firm. And I'm deeply practiced in the challenges of cultivating and sustaining diverse workforces to position businesses for agile growth. I work with agile and high growth business leaders and boards of private, public, and PE-backed companies, disruptive in their industries, to more fully realize the untapped value of their people. I've worked on acquisitions and cultural integrations and cultural transformations of companies. My prior experience was head of human resources for a couple of companies, both startup and also multinational enterprises. I come from India. I came to the US as a student and then started my career with GE, and that's been my foundation for my experiences. Delighted to be part of this panel with some very interesting individuals.
Thank you so much. Ruth?
Hi, wow, follow that one. So Ruth Daniels, General Counsel and Company Secretary at Superdry, and I have been here for a couple of years. I've held a number of GC roles in different countries, in different companies, and I started my career actually in retail at Marks and Spencer, and I'm passionate about DI&E. I'm the exec sponsor of it here at Superdry, and it's something that is very much at the core of what we're doing, and I'm hosting a panel later for International Women's Day here.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for joining us last minute. Fiona?
Hi, yes, so I'm Fiona. I'm an Associate General Counsel at McKinsey in Hong Kong. I just manage the litigation and contentious regulatory issues for Asia. I've been in Hong Kong since 2007 in private practice, and then investment bank, so Barclays, Bank of America before my current role. Separately to that, I actually lost my leg in the Asian tsunami in 2004, and I've raised a lot of money for charity as a result of that, and been pretty involved in kind of disability advocacy kind of ever since. At BAML, I headed up the Asia Disability Advocacy Network. I'm also a TEDx speaker, a former TEDx speaker and a coach, and then part-time I teach yoga at Pure Yoga in Hong Kong. So great to meet you all virtually when we can't see anybody.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you all again for joining us. I'm really kind of keen to get into the topic of how we can break the bias, but I think a good place to start is by setting the scene and talking about some of our experiences of bias. Ruth, have you experienced bias during your career, and how have you dealt with that, or maybe looking back, wish you'd dealt with it perhaps differently with hindsight?
Yeah, I think having been around for a while, would say there's probably been a few biases along the way. I can remember sitting in a meeting and a group of men trying to guess what size bra I might be wearing as a starting point. And actually, at the beginning of my legal career, asking the question as to whether it was okay to wear trousers in the office. Which, you know, in this day and age seems quite ridiculous. I think dealing with clients when I was in private practice from different countries, where maybe dealing with a woman wasn't something that was really acceptable, and having people defer to a male colleague in that environment was difficult. And just, you know, remember, you know, inviting someone out for a business dinner and thinking that gave, you know, the automatic right to make a pass, you know, me as well. So yeah, seen a few things along the way, but also seen some great experiences as well. So not all bad.
And how would you deal with those situations where you've got someone who is deferring to your male colleague?
So I think in that situation, I actually had an amazing client who, a male client who very much supported me, and he was very explicit about the fact that, you know, I had authority to deal and they should be dealing with them, and by going to him was not going to, you know, that it was undermining me. So that was very clear. I think the importance of, and we talked about this earlier a little bit, didn't we, about male allyship is really important. So around the table, making sure that you've got other people who will speak up for you, but also being able to call out things in a way that is measured and which is, you know, but which is right, and having the confidence to be able to do that, which I think probably earlier in my career I didn't have that. So I think it's incredibly important that, you know, that resilience and how you handle things is kind of really important.
Yeah, I agree. And Gail, have you had similar experiences?
Oh, yes, I've had. I think I've been a little bit longer in the world of work. Well, my first experience was when I came from India, went to Wharton, and none of the boys would talk to me for 3 months. They wouldn't even say hello. And then after about 3-4 months, I found out that at least one of the excuses was that they felt Indian women didn't talk to men. I had to remind them that our population at that time was 600 million, and we Indian women did a lot more than talking. So I learned very early on, it's strangely in India, we don't have gender discrimination in the city. So I had friends who were doctors and attorneys, and this was something new for me to deal with. When I went to work for GE, there were 2 professional women among 8,000 people in the aerospace defense business. And I had to find my own way of dealing with the gender issues, because I went through what Ruth had just mentioned. But one of them that was quite amusing is that after I bought a new car there, and one day one of the guys asked me, they didn't ask me for lunch before, but they asked me one day if they could borrow my car, and I thought they were going to ask me for lunch. No, they wanted to borrow my car because there were 6 of them going out for lunch. I said, sure, because I had to find a way of breaking through this barrier. And every Friday, they borrowed my car for 9 months and went for lunch. And I think finally, I figured they will feel guilty at some point. It took them 9 months only. And they invited me for lunch. And then that broke the ice. And then I was invited to lunch after that. So I feel resiliency. Yes, you need that. I was there for the long run. I could have said no, and I would never have gotten what I wanted. So I think there is discrimination, gender discrimination, but we have to find a way of dealing with these, I call smaller issues, to get what we really want to get, which is equality in our jobs and performance and excitement. And Ruth brought up a very interesting thing about trousers. And I was involved with an acquisition of a financial services company. I won't mention the name. And after we did the whole cultural integration for 3 months, the day before the acquisition, I was told that the other side would not let our women wear trousers, pantsuits. And pantsuits were the big fashion statement at that point. I suspected there was something funny with the CEO, and we did an investigation, and he was accused of sexual harassment. He had made that as a policy. We terminated him before he joined the company the same day. So you have to take appropriate action when you see something wrong. But things are getting a little better, but I think allyship, as Ruth mentioned, is good. And we'll talk a little bit more of what companies can do.
That's brilliant, thank you. And really interesting that you found you actually came across more bias when you came to the US than you'd experienced in India.
Definitely.
Fiona, you've spent most of your career in Hong Kong. What kind of experiences have you had with bias during that time?
Yeah, I mean, actually, to be honest, the female thing, maybe I'm really dormant, but I haven't noticed it that much career-wise. I'd say probably the youth thing has been probably one of the most obvious kind of issue that I've dealt with in my career. I mean, at one point, I was kind of the only litigation lawyer in the organisation I was working for. They were looking for a head of litigation. I had been doing it on my own, so I kind of told them that I thought I should do it, but I wasn't that senior. I was maybe 6 or 7 years qualified at the time, which is pretty junior, and they refused on grounds of my age. Well, they never obviously expressly said that, but the person that they ended up employing for the job was a 55-year-old white man with bald head who had never done litigation before in his life. So it was pretty obvious what the reason I didn't get the job was. So I think, I mean, that's probably the biggest example of, and I'm pretty sure it was bias, that comes to mind career-wise for me. And I've been thinking about what both Gail and Ruth have said. I think the ways to deal with it exactly is kind of just the small things, resilience. I mean, in that instance, I probably didn't deal with it. Well, I mean, I wrote everything that happened down. I escalated it, not loudly enough when I look back, because I don't think I really had the confidence to do it at that stage. And I ended up leaving for the same job in a different organisation. And so I got the main job kind of anyway in the end. I mean, looking back now, like, I think I would be louder, like, without a doubt. But really, I mean, in my experience, the best way to deal with bias has been all the way through my career, really, just to demonstrate competence and to do it consistently. You know, how you deal with it, how you deal with the people. Take things lightly when you need to, but remember them and keep kind of reinforcing the fact that you're there because you're there on the merits and not for any kind of other reason. And that's, I think, it's got to be the way, hasn't it, as well as the allyship.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very hard it's hard to argue with, isn't it, if you've got the delivery?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess we're all guilty of some form of bias. Fiona, what bias do you still hold on to despite maybe your best efforts?
So I'm an amputee, so I've lost my right leg below the knee, and it's actually very odd because it didn't happen to me until I was 27, so I was kind of a fair way through my life at that stage, and I've done loads of kind of physical stuff kind of ever since, probably far more than I would have had that not happened, but I still struggle a bit with, like, I guess, my own bias against disability. I mean, maybe the easiest way to describe it is physical stuff. So it would be you know, often I'll think about, can I go skiing? Can I go and do this? Can I run? And my first answer to myself tends to be like, no, of course you can't do that. And then I kind of think, well, maybe I can. And then I try one thing and I realize I can do it. And then I try another thing and I realize I can do it. And I surprise myself. I mean, still now I'm surprising myself like again and again and again, suddenly finding all these things that are possible. So like I've almost had to fight against my own bias as far as the disability side of things is concerned. And I think it's come from, I mean, really, it's kind of facing it. So it's looking at it kind of in the eye and then working out. For me, it's been working about ways around it or ways to use it in the best way that I can. And I think that's probably a good kind of guide, really, for anything.
Yeah, I think the first step really with tackling bias is recognizing it and understanding how it's affecting your actions, right? And then you can tackle it head on, which it sounds like you're definitely doing. Gail, what about you? What forms of bias do you feel that you have?
Well, it's not so much gender, it is more of authenticity. I tend to look at people who are authentic and I make a quick judgment on that. So I have to be very conscious of it when I'm doing it. And it came to head one time when I was attending a leadership program early on in my career. And there was a young man, this was a very intense program where 6 of us, we had 6 faculty watching us, and our careers depended on it in a certain way. And there was a young gentleman with the name of Rockefeller, and I immediately made rich man's kid, spoiled kid, you know, all of those things in my mind. And he was very aggressive in these sessions. And at the end of the session, to the 1-week-long intense program, we got feedback, the peer review, and also from the 6 faculty. And he did pretty badly. And he started crying, literally crying. And I went up to him and I talked to him. And he really came from very humble beginnings. He was told by his boss that he had to do really well in this program or his career with GE would die. And I felt sorry for him. And it's always stood there before I make a decision, thinking about that experience, how badly I misjudged this young man. So I think authenticity is important to me. And you really have to look and make look at all the factors before you come to that conclusion. So that's sort of my unconscious bias that I'm always aware of.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've not thought of that before. I think I'm probably guilty of that too. If somebody is inauthentic, there's often an underlying reason behind that. And sometimes it might be confidence or something like you've described. Right. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And Ruth, in your role, you must come across a lot of unconscious bias. How do you make sure that you have awareness and that you're avoiding that in your interactions?
Yeah, I think the previous point about making sure you're not judging too quickly is really important. And I think sometimes it's easy when you're rushing around and you're trying to get stuff done that you kind of make a snap decision about, if someone hasn't done something or why something hasn't been done, or if you're interviewing someone, there's lots of stats, isn't there, that people make their mind up really quickly, in the first 5 minutes, and and maybe how people dress or how people talk and how people behave and how people speak, all of those different things that you sometimes just need to open your mind and give yourself time and give someone else time. I think in meetings it's really important, especially if you're in a meeting with a new group of people, to just try and understand the dynamic of those individuals, and also it's not always the loudest voice in the room that is the one that needs or should be heard, and so making sure that you're bringing those people out, or that you're not suppressing them sort of making contributions or comments, I think is really, really important. Because not everybody is the same, and that's why we talk about diversity, right? Because we talk about the value of diversity. So you're only ever going to get that value if you really do, include everybody rather than excluding certain groups of people.
Yeah, I think that piece around giving people space to be themselves is really important, and I guess that ties into the allyship, right? It's about being an ally for those individuals.
Yeah. And what I find actually, and I've increasingly found in my career, that the younger people in my team are actually really important at doing that. There's a generation now where they've got much better awareness that we ever had, you know, at the beginning of our careers, and how they behave, how they include, how they, you know, sort of make suggestions and things like that. It's hugely important, you know. That kind of reverse mentoring bit is
Yeah,
kind of, you know,
and they're
really,
far
really
better
important.
than far better than us at calling it out, actually, because it's something that's ingrained in their personalities.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for sharing your experiences, and I know your stories certainly resonate with me, and I'm sure they do with others. It's quite interesting that whilst you've all spent your careers in different countries at different times, you've had a lot of similar experiences and a lot of similar themes coming through, particularly in terms of that kind of calling out of behaviour and the allyship piece. I guess the big question is, and the bit that we're kind of keen to spend time on, is what companies can do to break the bias, and I guess companies and individuals. Gail, what advice would you give to people who are looking for ways to break the bias within their organisation or at work? Oh, sorry, Gail.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think the pandemic has created a little bit more, some good stuff and some more issues to deal with. It's been definitely a factor there. But I think companies really need to be more intentional in what they are doing. Companies have put in programs like work-life balance, okay? But you need to go deeper than that to think about really women who have children, women who are the sandwich generation, taking care of the elderly, people who have COVID in their families, and how are they dealing with it. So it's good to do the work-life balance, but my issue here is go deep into it and understand what you're offering. I think we need to have intentional leadership development for women. It is definitely, there are some issues there that general leadership programs are helpful, but there are specific programs that they need to go through. Company policies need to change, evolve to meet the new generation and the new businesses we're in. So looking at things like your leaves of absence and time off and coming to work and hybrid and remote, all of that is such a complex sort of situation. And building diversity, equity into the culture, into the DNA of the company. And I'd like to give an example of that. At a company, you know, many women have, and this has been an issue, at least in my generation, where men go golfing and women are left out because they don't golf. A lot of business decisions and promotions are made on the golf course. So at one of the companies, I decided, because every Friday in the summertime, men would go golfing, most of the men. I was stuck in the office working. And at one point, I got a little frustrated. So I called the guy who was organizing golf. I didn't know a thing about golf, honestly. And I said, where do I get lessons? What does it cost? You know, and he says, why would you be interested? I said, yes, while they're golfing on the course, I want to go on the driving range. And so I got a couple of the other guys who, interestingly, were from minority groups. And I said, we are going on the driving range and we're going to make some rules. That is, we don't talk about how bad we are, but we have a lot of fun. And then we join the main team for dinner and all the social conversation. That program took off like wildfire. The women in the company were really liked it, even though they couldn't participate because you had to be a certain level to get it. But it was a tremendous way of breaking in. And that's what I mean, get it into the culture of things. Of course, the employee resource groups are good. And the last thing that I think is very important is look for a mentor, and especially if you can get a male mentor. Somebody who's willing to follow I call it follow the white horse, and it's sort of an expression I've used, because you can see how he or she is doing it. If you get a female mentor, great. My time, there weren't that many females, so I had to depend on male mentors. And they helped me get to the understand how business operates.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. That's something I experienced actually, because whenever I was paired with a mentor, they would automatically pair me with a senior woman, which I understand because there's that, there's that connection. But actually, I ended up saying, right, I want to be paired with a man. I want to see how they work differently, and it was really interesting. Fiona, I'm keen to ask you about the actions companies can take, but actually we've had a few questions come through, which I just wanted to, interestingly, a bit of a theme around the bit that you mentioned, Fiona, around proving yourself in order to, to be able to achieve what you want to. Quite a few comments around women needing to prove themselves more than men and needing to deliver more than men have to in order to progress. Do you think that's true to say?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually, because if you'd asked me that maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would agree, and I would feel that, like, yes, that's definitely true. But after having, worked full time for this long, having 2 kids, doing the yoga teaching, doing all the TEDx stuff, what I actually find is that I'm still doing my full-time job, but my life is insanely busy, and I've done a lot of the thinking around the yoga as well. And I've started to realize through doing that actually, I think what we do as women generally is instinctively to be the people that work really hard. And it's that working really hard with the expectation that your working hardness is going to be noticed by everybody else, rather than pushing yourself out there and deliberately talking up what you're doing. And I would say over the past 5 or 6 years, I've really started to, I'm not working less, I'm not dialing back on the working, but it's been a much more of a focused process where I really think hard about what it is going to give me visibility in the organisation I'm working in, and what's actually worthwhile doing. Being slightly more senior helps quite a lot. But what I'm finding with that is that it's a lot easier to be noticed and to really stand out, being competent with everything that you do, but at the same time not backing yourself into a corner and ending up having to work all the hours God send and working really hard. So I think it's working probably a little bit more like a man would instinctively work, actually, which goes to the male mentor kind of point that Gail and Ruth and you have been making. So I think, funnily enough, I would say, I think maybe the unconscious bias of women is that we have to work harder than men to be noticed, but maybe that's just us and the way that we're thinking. Actually, what we need to do is be a bit more like a man and work out what you can let go. Because especially with the way that the world is today, people get hundreds of emails every day. Like, it's absolutely impossible for me to do everything that comes onto my desk and do it perfectly. It's just not going to happen. And as time goes on and life goes on, it's just going to get worse. So we really have to focus in, I think, on what we can do well, and then also work out how to self-publicize and how to market ourselves within our organizations, and to network and to build the relationships, because I think that's actually what's key, rather than killing ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think I would agree. I think there's lots of male colleagues who I just think are better at identifying those really high value activities that are going to get them noticed and perhaps, speed up their progression. Whereas a lot of the women I work with, and I hate to generalize, are really thorough, and it's really important to us to do a good job, and that we're doing everything we should do. I will come back to you on the key actions for companies, but Ruth, I just wanted to get your take on that piece around women perhaps having to deliver more than men to progress.
Yeah, it's interesting because that is a rhetoric that you hear, isn't it? You've got to prove yourself more, you've got to deliver twice as hard. I think some of it is true. I think some of it is maybe kind of a bit sort of self-perpetuating, and it's sort of, that's what people keep on saying, so therefore you have to say it. Imposter syndrome, I've heard lots and lots of things about that over the years. Some people do feel it. I have never felt it. So I think, again, some of these things can be a bit self-perpetuating. For me, I think the important thing is around the networking piece. And you watch how people who've succeeded in organizations operating, navigating, working relationships is so important. And I do think that, again, generalization, I do think women can be more hesitant about doing that. Part of it, I think, is because of just how people are brought up. yes, you know, I have lots of male friends. I go to the rugby, I go to the football. I don't see any differences, but I think sometimes that gender separation can be quite extreme. And so therefore it wouldn't be natural for a woman to go, you just go and have a conversation about the rugby and the beers and all that kind of thing, or to go out. And that then impacts how they behave in the workplace. It impacts how men and women behave in the workplace. And so I think reflecting on that, I think is really, really important. You know, I've had comical moments where, you know, as I say, you know, I'm very comfortable in those, you know, if I'm in a room with a bunch of men and they're talking about the rugby and the football, absolutely fine. But on the flip side, I've noticed, you know, if I'm in a meeting with predominantly women and there's a man in the room, women don't think about how the guy is being excluded by the conversation. So it kind of flips both ways. And that I think is just really important when you're navigating the, you know, the politics of an organization and performing. Finding the mentor is important. I think sometimes you don't necessarily have to have a formal mentor. I've always had very informal mentors. They've never known that they've necessarily been my mentor, but I've thought they're a smart person and they actually influence that person. So therefore I'm going to go and build a relationship with them, because it's easier to build a relationship with them than it is with them. But I know that they will then hopefully be an ally for me and speak positively in that way. And I think starting to think about how you navigate situations in that way, I think can be hugely helpful for how effective you are in your career. You know, everyone can be really, really busy. As you've said, you know, we've all got millions of things to do. Everyone's juggling lots and lots of different things. And I think in this day and age, when you've got organizations with multi-generational sort of workforces, you know, five different generations potentially all working together. Some people are worried about going to the gym. Some people are worried about looking after their parents. Some people are looking after their children. Some people are doing all of it. You know, you've got to think about how effective you are in your working environment. And that includes how effective you are about navigating your career progression.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. We've actually had another question come through, which I guess kind of ties into what you said, Ruth, around someone's asked, you know, why should we behave like a man when we're women? So in that kind of setting where you've got, you know, lots of males and you're perhaps talking about rugby, and I mean, I guess, you know, what you're saying is that's kind of a social thing, and obviously you referenced the same scenario where men are in a room full of women and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But I guess it's a much more common scenario that certainly probably within a leadership setting, you're more likely to be in a room full of men than a room full of women.
So I suppose what I didn't say there was behave like a man. So someone has assumed that because I talk about rugby, I'm trying to behave like a man. I'm sports mad and I've always been sports mad. Yeah. So, and for me, it's about being really authentic and being yourself. But you also have to recognize about being smart in different situations and finding those small things that you can start to build a relationship with somebody. That's not about trying to be like them, but it's trying to find a common ground that you can have a conversation, or that you can get them to go, oh, they know what they're talking about, and then how that conversation then leads on to another conversation. So I think it's quite an important difference. I definitely would not advocate anyone trying to be someone that they're not, or to, you know, to think that they've got to step into a man's shoes. But I think watching what works and learning from that is really important, just as men can do the same, you know, with women, in terms of maybe EQ and other areas that, you know, more naturally women seem to have.
Yeah, it's emotional intelligence, isn't it? Sorry, Fiona, go on.
And I was going to say, I think I was the one that said behave more like a man. And Ruth, thank you very much for that's what I meant. But I think I was going to say also, actually, when I've looked at the most effective men in any organization, it's been the ones that have had the EQ. And the combination of working out where to focus your energy and having the EQ, I think, is a winner, be a man or a woman.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's about being able to adapt your style and build relationships with people who perhaps you don't have lots in common with. Would you agree with that, Gail? I know you mentioned obviously the example about golf earlier.
Yeah, I think I was listening about what Ruth and Fiona said. I don't have to be like a man, but you can learn from them how they navigate. A key point that I think Fiona brought is about working. We women tend to work hard generally, and that's sort of the impression that everyone has. but we don't promote ourselves very well and what we do. And that is something we can learn from men, that they're great promoters without bragging, but to let our work show who we are and what we want to do, what we want to aspire to. So I think that's very important. And one of the common expressions I heard when I was much younger was, "You're not like other women." And unfortunately, at that era, there weren't women who were working. The men met waitresses, nurses, and mistresses were the women that they dealt with. So they had never really dealt with a professional woman. And I realized that they were not biased because they were wanting to be biased, but they really didn't know how to deal with a woman. So I had to sort of find a way of making them comfortable. And quite frankly, I didn't know football because in India, we don't play football, we play soccer. So I would listen to them ask dumb questions and they would try to explain it to me. But that's as far as I got because I never understood the game at all. But it was trying to have a dialogue with them on their grounds. And then they would talk to you and ask questions and make them feel a little comfortable. I still think that exists sometimes at the top level. You know, they just have not understood how to deal with professional women. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really important point. And it's easy to become, you know, angry, agitated about how you feel you might be being treated. But I do think sometimes you've got to try and put yourself in their shoes and to just sort of understand, and it's helping educate. You know, I've seen over the years, there's been so many different women's initiatives that started, which have all been tremendous. But what I've also seen is an alienation of men in that process. And so there's a bit of a fear now of them not wanting to engage because they're not sure about what should say. And I do think it's incumbent on us to actually help engage in that conversation. I have one very funny golf story, actually, that, like you, I was fed up of missing out those corporate days and everything. So I thought, I know, I'm gonna join a golf club and learn how to play golf. And everyone was saying, oh, there's a long waiting list. And I said, it's all right, I'll get on because I'm a woman. So I did. I skipped the waiting list because I was a woman. So I had positive bias in my favor. And I received my my welcome notes to the golf club, and it was a picture of a man telling me what I should wear. So they received a very feisty letter from me explaining that if they wanted to welcome women into the golf club, they might start by sending them a picture of a woman wearing golf clothes rather than telling me what men's clothes I should be wearing.
Brilliant. And another question that's come through is around, you know, is gender bias a generational thing? You know, the Gen X that's coming through, do they just have a natural acceptance of diversity? Is it just us older generations that think there's still an issue? Gail, what do you think on that?
I think the younger generation still feel there are some issues of bias. They generally are much better at accepting diversity of all kinds. At least I've seen that in my children who are young adults and their friends, and they're the high achievers. Now, maybe that's a smaller group I'm seeing, but I definitely see that they're a little more bright, accepting, or they don't even in many instances recognize that there is a diverse population. They're just individuals, which is the best thing to do. But yes, there is still bias. I see it when we're hiring, for example, when I was working in where managers would say, believe it or not, a CFO told me, I don't want to hire a woman because she has a lot of eyeshadow. This was for a controller job. And I could not convince him to hire her. Isn't that sad? So, you know, there are those biases still there. And we have to keep arguing and making the point that you need it. And I think one other issue that male managers understand is if you can translate that into a business need, why we need to hire women, because the population, whatever, the half of it is women, and they're buying your products. Better still have a woman there. So if we can tie this to the business issues, I think we get a better acceptance. We did that when we were trying to do mortgage lending to minorities, and we realized that women make a lot of decisions in the minority groups. And we were promoting both minority groups and women to come in. And we increased our population at the senior levels, and we increased our market share by 33%. So when we did that, men were a lot more acceptable of that.
Great. That's really interesting. And Ruth, I know you're a big fan of the younger generation, and do you feel like it's less of an issue for them?
I think it depends on where you look. You know, I'm now looking at my friends' kids and seeing them sort of growing up. I think on the whole, there's definitely less sort of prejudice and bias. It does still exist though. And also what then happens is if there's prejudice and bias existing in places that they go and work or that they are, then you know, then that will be the environment in which they have to perform. So I think, you know, I love listening to younger people and what they have to say on issues, and they're my temperature check barometer really on things. I'm really lucky. I have some amazing guys in my team who are totally on it in terms of being very you know, no biases at all. And I think as well the point about talent and making the economic argument is key. But in the current market where we have such talent challenges, why would you be excluding certain groups of people, and why would you not be putting certain things in place to ensure that those people can work effectively and in a way that you can then benefit? So it just doesn't make sense to me as to why you wouldn't be looking at certain groups of people when you've got such talent challenges at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Fiona, I guess getting back to what companies can do in order to create that more inclusive environment, what advice would you give?
So I've got a few specific pointers from McKinsey that I can talk about, but also actually just thinking about the conversation just more generically. One thing that's come through to me from everything that we've talked about so far that no one's specifically talked about yet is curiosity. Like, I think actually if you're going to talk about breaking bias, I think that's the key, because as we've all talked about, everybody in the world is just an individual, and I feel like the best way, certainly I know with my leg I keep coming back to it, but it's an easy topic, the best way I've managed to get over my own bias about my own disability is being curious about it. So you know, noticing when I'm thinking that there's something that could be an issue, and then trying to understand kind of why that is and then what I can do. And I think that translates to kind of anybody. So if you've got, say, there's older people, younger people biases, I think potentially as well. So, for the older people, it's about asking questions to the younger people and not just relying on a perception, perhaps, that I definitely see, certainly in Hong Kong as a solicitor, of the older generation of lawyers thinking that the younger ones don't care and they all want to go home early. We were all working at our desks till midnight every day. Why are they not doing that? But actually, if you talk to the younger generation and ask them questions, they just work differently, and it's accepting that. So I feel like that's a big overall kind of theme. It's to notice when you can see the bias, and then to inquire about it, really. Separately, I think kind of building people up within your teams and within your circle is really important. So one thing that I'm doing at the moment, I'm running the training for the legal team in Asia and McKinsey, and we've really noticed that some of our more junior colleagues aren't great at self-promoting, and McKinsey's a big global organization, and it's very much it's quite US centric. So actually it's really important to be able to speak up in these big forums, and people just don't have the confidence. So I'm trying to help them basically with their public speaking skills, and I think, and I know for me that's helped me immensely in my career as I've gone forward, because once you do it and you realize that you can have an impact and you can do it in pretty short, succinct time, and people listen to what you're saying, then that gives you so much more confidence. And as time goes by, you can help yourself to break the biases down.
That ties into a question actually that we've had, which is around what advice would you give around self-promotion for people who find that more difficult? That allyship sounds like it's really important with that mentoring. Is that the advice you would give?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, and it's something that I still struggle with, because instinctively it feels like boasting. So you have to try and get over that to start with. And I think really it's all the things we've been talking about. So kind of building the relationships and connecting with somebody, kind of with people authentically. And then in that way, it all becomes a little bit easier to try and promote yourself. One thing that we're very big on in the legal department in McKinsey is trying to bring people out in themselves. So we've recently started a legal department blog that was being published globally on the internet, and we've been encouraged just to write about anything we want to write about. So I wrote one on how being a yoga teacher has what it's taught me about being a lawyer, and that has helped me immensely because the whole legal department in Asia has read it. Well, the whole legal department globally has been able to read it, and that's I think I'm not articulating this very well, but I think the self-promotion, I think it's something that you would have to it's really working out how you can do it authentically, how you connect with people authentically.
The authenticity is so important, because if you feel like you're doing self-promotion for self-promotion's sake, it feels really uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then inherently having faith that what you're doing and that the substance of your work does have value. I think lots of it comes from inside, as well as engaging with people around you, and making those relationships. I don't know whether Ruth, Gail have got a better, more articulate, succinct answer than that.
I think there is that balance, isn't it, between self-promoting and showing your credibility, that it doesn't sound like you're being arrogant or boasting and things like that. Yeah. But there is a place for it sometimes. If you're going out for a review in your career, then you need to have your list of achievements ready to explain why you're performing above and beyond, why, here's your job role, here's all the additional things you're doing, this is why you think you deserve to be promoted, and actually here's the data that shows that this is what I should be being paid. And so the more data and the more validation you have around things like that, then the kind of more likely you'll get results on a conversation, as opposed to, I'm doing really well and I want to get promoted. That's not really right. The allyship, I think, is important, and having people being your cheerleader is helpful. And I think I like what you're saying about making sure that people are building their confidence where they might not do something. In my team, we make sure that we sort of celebrate, try and do it in our monthly team meetings to sort of call out whether people have been doing well, what they've done, what they've achieved, and also make sure that doesn't just stay within the team, that it goes out sort of organization wide. And I think companies can do a better job of that, in terms of making sure that people who are called out for doing great work, it isn't just the same group of people, maybe men, who are celebrated, or it's in specific areas of the business. And one of my colleagues, actually, she's ex-Nike, she made a comment saying that at Nike, when they were looking at kind of breaking the bias, their male colleagues were challenged with going and pulling out or being sort of made to sort of be able to go and talk about women in the organization, so that that their networks kind of were mainly men. And so it was okay, so why aren't you talking about women? Is it because you don't know any of the women in the organization? And if you talk about them, are you talking about them in a professional, credible way, or are you talking about them in another way? And so I think, again, having people reflect on who their own personal networks are in an organization, and to then say, do I really know enough about the women in the organization? Challenging the exec to say, look, that pipeline of talent that you've got below you, do you really understand all of it? And why do you only understand a certain group? Why don't you understand another group as well? So
thank you. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think the personal network piece is it is an interesting topic, because I think there still is some bias that surrounds a male being really well connected with a female in the office, which I know is kind of really dated, but actually I think I can't remember, was it you, Ruth, or Fiona, that said earlier about going out for that working lunch? If it's you and a male, does it feel like it's then got a different angle to it? Is it less easy for two people of opposite sex to form that working connection, maybe? Okay, great. Sorry, Fiona, I know you were in the middle of talking.
No,
through
you're good. Thank you for the help on that. So yeah, actually, so I asked, knowing this question might come up, I asked at work kind of what actually we do on that front, on the breaking the bias front, and actually there's a really helpful kind of framework in place, which I think is probably applicable to kind of every organisation, that's very sensible. So I think first of all, what we try to do is define what we're trying to do. So being very clear about the definition of what do we mean by bias, what are we trying to achieve, and then diagnose kind of practices that we can come up with. So things that we can do, really practical things that we can do to try and change it, whatever that may be. So it could be, the things that we talked about, like helping people to build their network, or helping people to speak publicly better, whatever it might be. Develop a roadmap. So come up with a plan, and then track it, like make it measurable, track it, and then also I think probably the most important thing is kind of have focus. So don't let things, don't have like 85 things that you're trying to do. If there's 2 or 3 different, very well-defined goals, that's always going to be better. And then make people accountable for it. So I know, for example, at the moment, kind of ESG is the talk of the town, and that's what everybody's focusing on. But in a year's time, who knows? Maybe it's not going to be such a big thing. So I mean, the key is really consistency. Keep tracking it, have people who are accountable for it, and just put a process in place. Really, it's not very exciting. But that's how things get done in big organizations. So that's it, really.
Yeah, it's about making it tangible and measurable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you, that's really useful. And Ruth, what key actions would you like to see organizations take?
I think it's really understanding their organization and how it is operating, and are there biases, and then developing a plan to tackle those. I think it's easy to say, oh, it's fine, we don't have anything, there's no problem, and then you start digging into it. I think the gender pay gap is always a great kind of barometer of where things might be within your organization. I also think organizations who've got supply chains, or who operate with a wider third-party network, are in a great position to create accountability on those sort of areas as well. So it's not just your own company, that you start putting accountability and pressure on others. And I think for me, when I joined Superdry, it's the first organization I've worked at where there are 2 women on the board, and the power of that for me has been incredible. Big shout out to Helen and Georgina if you happen to listen to this. They're brilliant. And also I have 2 female colleagues on the board, on the exec team as well. So there's kind of critical mass, and it really starts to change the conversation that you're able to have around the table. So keeping that focus, we know there's lots of reports out there, FTSE 250, FTSE 100, women, Hampton Alexander reviews, McKinsey reviews, all that kind of great stuff. But I think really, holding organizations to account about where their gender mix is at the senior level, what the pipeline is, tracking that progress, why aren't people progressing if they're not, is really, really important. And creating an environment that people can talk comfortably about this. And because you've got to recognize not everyone has got the same understanding, comes from the same place and everything. And some people might never ever get on the bus for it. But I think it's making sure that you're creating culturally the right environment to talk about it, and to help people feel comfortable, and to go, hey, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but who can help me? Or to say, I'm really curious about this, I'm going to go and find out, and then why don't we do this? And accepting challenge. So that's to me, those to me are the key things.
Yeah, it's a really important point, isn't it? I think it ties into what Fiona said about being inquisitive around bias. It's creating that safe environment where people aren't worried about perhaps causing offence or being clumsy around it, but they can question it and challenge it and understand it better.
Yeah, and we've had, as an organisation, quite a lot of conversations relating to all different topics. And I think the important thing for me is don't shoot someone down because they get something wrong. Kind of congratulate them for actually trying to participate in the conversation or holding their hand up, and then you can address it, clearly, unless it's malicious or something like that. But I think that's how I think that's how you keep people engaged, continue to get them engaged, and actually bring them along on the journey with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Gail, anything that you'd add to that?
Yes, I'd like to sort of piggyback on this. I think it starts at the top. You need to have the right leadership, because you could start any program and it'll be what we call lip service to the program. So to be really genuine and intentional, the leadership has to commit to it. And you can put in all of your programs, and since I deal with compensation, I have seen inequity of compensation in my own self, but in also others. And I've had to constantly go back and saying we need equity in the pay structure. We need equity in the promotions and the high potential list as you're developing it. But you need to have measures. And if you don't have measures and you don't follow up on those measures, these programs just sort of flounder in a company. They're great to put in your annual report, but there's no reality to it. So for companies and for leaders to really make these programs work, they need to measure the success or the failure of the program. Because even if you measure the failure, you can say, what did we do wrong? Why did we do this? Let's change course. So that's important. And the other point that I wanted to make that I think Fiona brought up was when we're talking about self-promotion as females, there's a distinction between bragging and self-promotion. Because if you're working on a project, a great way to promote your project is to ask for different opinions from your colleagues. So that, hey, legal, what do you think of this? What are the minds I'm going to walk into if I promote this program? Now I have a legal, Fiona in this instance, would be interested in looking at it. And now I've got some dialogue going on my program rather than me working on it till midnight and then promoting it and nobody reads it because nobody has the time to read it. So there are ways of getting your promotion done and you end up with a better product. So I think those are sort of ways that we have to look at to get our messaging across and take some risks as we're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I can see we've still got lots of questions unanswered, but I think that's all we're going to have time for today. So we will do our best to get back to everybody. There's some really interesting points coming up. People asking about I guess the whole childcare piece, women having more to do at home, so maybe they don't have as much time for self-promotion. Lots of really interesting questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. So I'd like to thank everybody very much for attending. Big thank you to Gabby Kitney and Amy Allen from our marketing team who've done a brilliant job of putting this together. And finally, a huge thank you to our brilliant panelists. It's been a really interesting and inspirational discussion. I know that I've learned a lot and will take away some actions, and I'm sure everyone else will too. So thank you once again. Thanks.